Okay, here we go. We are entering into Friday's uh, slides and some more information as we lead into the Civil War battles. Next week, we will probably be more so getting into the battles specifically. But as of Friday, I just need to cover a couple more little things before we actually get into them meeting onto a battlefield. Okay, the leaders of the Union. I want to go over the leaders of the Confederacy. I want to go over this slide that needs to be uploaded on Friday. I'll go over the answers with you. Hopefully, this won't be too long. I really do apologize for Thursday's mini lesson. It was a little bit too long. I apologize for that. I would like for the strategy of the Union to be uploaded as well as the strategy of the South uploaded. Those three slides, please upload those on Friday. And boom, you are done. I do have a real quick quiz on the work that you did on Thursday. I'll probably give that to you on Monday, and it's going to go over the advantages and disadvantages of the Confederacy and the Union. So please make sure that you kind of have that down. Of course, you can use your notes. Okay, I'm going to flip over to the notes for the Civil War, and that way you can just take pictures from these or copy the pictures into your slides to complete the work for that day. Real quick, the leaders of the Union. You had Vice President Andrew Johnson, who was a Democrat, and he had the second most votes. And so obviously they had Vice President Johnson was in there with the second most votes, as well as President Abraham Lincoln. As you know, he gets elected in 1860. However, as you know, when Lincoln gets assassinated, Andrew Johnson becomes the vice president. By the way, he was also the first president to be impeached as well too, but was not removed from office. Okay, quickly, Lincoln went through a number of generals throughout the Civil War. You don't have to do anything on this slide, but just know that Lincoln had a hard time finding and a hard time keeping up with his generals because of issues. Number one, I think he fired George McClellan, I believe it was twice. He fired him here, and then he hired him back over here. A couple things he was upset about. I believe it was one of the Battle of Antietam when the Confederates were in retreat. Lincoln issued a mandate for George McClellan to chase after him and to continue to pursue Robert E. Lee. However, he did not. He kind of like disobeyed an order, or disobeyed the President of the United States, so we ended up firing him. He went through other generals as well too: Winfield Scott, Joseph Hooker, Irwin McDonald, Ambrose Burnside, George Meade, and finally in 1864 is when he hired Chief General Ulysses S. Grant, and he's the one that completed obviously the Civil War. So he is the most famous one for the Union. Confederacy. Here we go. The Confederacy. The president was Jefferson Davis. No, not a real president. He was a Confederate president. His vice president was Alexander Stephens. Good gosh, does he look not alive in this picture, but he was. Anyway, the vice president, not a real vice president, was the Confederate vice president, so you'll never see them, obviously, on my wall in the classroom. If we ever get back to the classroom, or when we get back to the classroom, you won't see these two guys on the wall because they were not U.S. presidents. Okay, they had the better generals, obviously. Robert E. Lee, he made a couple comments about why he was going to fight for the South. He didn't want to disappoint where he was born and raised and his family was. So he ended up fighting for the South, even though his first job was a officer in the United States Army. Stonewall Jackson, I'll go over him a little bit later. Stonewall Jackson, James Longstreet, all of these generals had knew the way of the land in the South, obviously, because a lot of the battles took place in the South. So they had more success, and we're going to go over that here coming up either Friday or Monday of next week. Why that was so, because if you looked at all of the advantages and disadvantages, you should know immediately that the North should win. Boom, it should be over in like a week. Well, actually, it took 4 years, and that's because of the South and the generals. The generals in the South had a better I want to say plan, but they had a better, they knew the way of the land better, and they had a reason to fight. And so there was a lot of issues with the northern generals. Okay, war erupts. Real quick, Robert E. Lee resigned from the United States Army and joined the Confederacy. His famous quote is, "I cannot raise my hand against my birthplace, my home, my children." So this is why he fought for the South. Was it because he was from Virginia? He became the Confederacy's commanding general. Real quick, guys, I want to show you this as well too about the South. Are some topsy-turvy political cartoons that were, when you turn them upside down, they had another picture. So this picture was like Jefferson Davis, the president of the South, as a leaning forward soldier. But when you flipped him, he was a returning from war as a mule, as someone that is not very smart. And so they kind of were, these topsy-turvy political cartoons were criticizing the efforts of Jefferson Davis through political means in newspapers. Okay, real quick, the North strategy. Here we go. The North strategy was to snake or anaconda the South. The North had a strategy called the Anaconda Plan, which was to choke out the South. They wanted to choke the South by destroying its economy. And so they would start in Virginia, I'm sorry, Maryland, and then work their way around the United States up the Mississippi River and kind of divide the South into two. They ended up destroying things, cutting up railroad ties, burning things that they could use. They really wanted to choke out the South. And this plan obviously was going to take a long time. But just to let you know, a little secret, this was the best plan between the two, the North and the South. They wanted to gain control of their rivers and oceans. They wanted to blockade ships from resupplying the South. This is a great plan. However, the big problem with this is it's going to take a long time to accomplish, which is what a snake normally does. It doesn't just go there and choke out its prey. It takes a long time to finally end its prey's life. Okay, as you can tell, there's another little picture as well. Confederacy plan. They wanted to be an independent nation, and so they just want to be left alone. So really, the Confederate strategy was to really just kind of play from a defensive stance. They also thought that cotton would win a lot of foreign support and that Europe would eventually become their allies. However, shortly after the war began, this never really happened, unfortunately. Europe never wanted to enter into another war, and so this really disappointed the South. And however, shortly after the war began, we're going to get into this, the South aggressively attacked the North in hopes of big victories over the North. And this did happen in the beginning of the Civil War. We're going to go over that a little bit more on Monday. And I'll just real quick to let you know that the the North were really surprised at the fighting strategy and the fighting tenacious. This Confederates' tenacious work at defeating the North was really to a surprise of the Union. Okay, make sure you get a picture of the Union leaders, Andrew Johnson and Abraham Lincoln. Please get a picture of Jefferson Davis and Vice President Alexander Stephens from your notes. Place them there. All right, real quick, this is what needs to be submitted. Who was the commanding general of the South? Robert E. Lee. 2. Who was his previous employer? Well, it was the U.S. federal government and the U.S. Army. Who was the commanding general of the North at the end of the war? That would be Ulysses S. Grant. What does the quote mean? I cannot raise my hand against my birthplace, my home, my children mean? Well, Robert E. Lee wanted to be loyal to his South, to the southern states because of where he was born and raised. 5. Which side had better leaders? The South had better leaders. Which of the two sides fought harder? The South fought harder. Which position did the South fight from? A defensive position. Which position did the North fight from? Well, they fought in the South, so they a lot of battles did not take place in the North. We're going to go over that starting next week. Which side knew the terrain better? That would obviously be the South. And what was the South strategy? Well, the South strategy was to play from a defensive stance and hopefully get the European nations to form an alliance with them and join them in fighting the North. You don't have to do anything on this slide. This is just going over that little topsy-turvy political cartoon, it kind of mocking Jefferson Davis. All right, going down to here, this is the strategy one more time. You don't need to do anything on this slide. Just make sure you have this slide. This is the Anaconda Plan for the North. This was to choke out the North. And here we go. I need a picture of a Union flag here, please. I need an image of the Union strategy here, an image of the Civil War blockades here. If you can find some blockades, Civil War blockades, please put some pictures there. What was the war strategy of the North? Well, we already went over that. It's also right here. The war strategy of the North was to anaconda, choke out the South. And I already told you the answer for number 2. Why was it called that? Why was it called the Anaconda Plan? Was to choke out the South's economy by taking by cutting off supply lines, by destroying things that the South could use. Name 2 components of the strategy in your own words. Name 2 components. You can put any of these things down there in your own words, please. And then what is the weakness of this strategy? Well, the weakness is it's going to take a very long time to accomplish. That's why the war lasted for almost 5 years. All right, the Confederacy strategy was, well, they just wanted to be left alone. They kind of fought from a defensive position, and they assumed that the North would kind of tire out, and that was their strategy. And they also thought that cotton would be a kind of a bartering tool, a bartering crop to use to acquire alliances with European nations. However, that never happened. All right, go here. Find a picture of the Confederate flag. Please put it there. Find an image of the Southern cotton, and please put a picture of cotton there. Find an image of war blockades, and you can put that there as well. What did the South assume about the North? Well, they thought that they would just kind of tire out and kind of quit. Who did the South expect to help them in the war? European nations. And then what did South have that would have made another country want to help them? Well, that was cotton, and which was like the white gold of the time. This is what they used to hopefully use as a bartering tool to get European nations to join them. And then did this strategy work? Well, obviously, no. The strategy was not an effective strategy. It wasn't a really good strategy. The North had a better strategy than the South, but as you can tell, and I'm going to go over starting on Monday, that the Confederates came out guns a-blazing, and they came out on fire and actually won a lot of battles in the beginning of the Civil War, starting with Bull Run, which we're going to go over on Monday. Okay, I think that's all. Sorry this was long. I hope this was informative and beneficial to you. Make sure that you get these 3 slides, this one, and this one, and this one uploaded into Canvas on Friday. Any questions? I will see you at the Hangout.